This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is very well known in the field of politics and law. Cass Sunstein. He's an American legal scholar specializing in the fields of constitutional law, administrative law, environmental law, and also brings a fantastic perspective to behavioral economics. He served in the Obama administration from 2009 to 2012. Now, I know for some in the audience, that's going to be a good thing. For some in the audience, that's going to be a bad thing. Hey, America's a 50-50 place today. I get it. Partisanship causes half the audience to go, man, I don't want to listen, and the other half to go, man, I want to listen. This episode, however, is for everyone. Today we discuss Cass's newest book, #Republic, Divided Democracy in the Age of Social Media. This is not a partisan topic. Trust me, very smart man who has done serious work to get us all to think about what's happening with social media. Specifically, what is it doing to us? A brief insight, and we all know this, we're going into our own little echo chambers, our own little sounding boards, where the outside information, the outside point of view, the contrarian point of view, it's not coming in because we already know what we think. And the other guy's view, we don't want what he has. But that's not the foundation of America. The foundation of America is competing viewpoints coming together to find a better way. #Republic is dense. That cover might look friendly. That cover might look inviting. But given that Cass is currently a professor of law at Harvard, you can probably imagine there's going to be some detail and there's going to be some depth, and there is. That said, it's a great read. It's a great reminder about what's happening to us in this age of social media. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Cass Sunstein. Professor, here's where I want to jump in today. I can think of some names that I'm sure you will know off the top of your head, and I can think of things that these men believe or say, and I agree with them. I can think of things that I've heard Van Jones say. I can think of things that I've heard Donald Trump say, Bill Maher, Newt Gingrich, even Alex Jones. I've heard things that all of these men have said that I can agree with. But for me to say that in this day and age, in the age of partyism, I'm no one's friend.
You can be my friend. I don't know that statement will make you friendless. I think things are a little bit better than that.
I guess the point that I'm trying to make there is that, and this goes right into the heart of your work, is that we have put ourselves in this situation, and I'm going to let you lay out your premise. We've put ourselves in this situation where we are all existing in these, not all of us necessarily, I mean, being a little general there, but inside these echo chambers where we defend our turf and we don't allow the alternate view in.
I think the way I would want to approach it is that the diversity of America is astounding, and any generalization about we is going to run in some trouble unless we say that, you know, we have lungs and we tend to be bipedal. Those are generally true, though even those have maybe some qualifications. So it is the case that, here's one way to put it, that many of us are sorted either by algorithm or by our own clicking behavior into information cocoons, which means that our own pre-existing tendencies get reinforced, which means that we get more confident, sometimes more extreme, and often more angry at our fellow citizens. And if that's happening simultaneously to people who think quite different things, then the opportunity for productive civic engagement is compromised. And since our elected representatives are ultimately accountable to us, their ability to engage in productive exchanges on things such as infrastructure improvements or highway safety or clean air or immigration, all of those things are also compromised.
Give me a little bit of the backstory. For those that know of you, and many do, they're going to know that you have played a role in several administrations. You have a partisan perspective. But going through this work, #Republic, I don't feel like I'm learning from a partisan. I feel like I'm learning from somebody who is attempting, there's some little bit of partisan there, but very minuscule. I mean, I really feel like I'm learning from someone who wants to push this issue of this divided democracy forward in a way to where we perhaps end up communicating better.
I grew up as a Republican in Massachusetts. My dad was a Republican, and it may be that Massachusetts Republicans from those days aren't the same as, the Republican Party now, but I have worked, very happily with people of both parties. Some of my best colleagues when I was in the Obama administration, colleagues in the sense of people with whom I had exchanges from which at least I learned stuff, were Republicans. And even phrasing it that way, I feel is not ideal because it's as if, one is either a Republican or Democrat, and that's one's self-understanding, such that to learn from someone who isn't what one is kind of noteworthy. But in fact, we're Americans or humans or people trying to solve some problem, and to see yourself in terms of one or another party is not going to be so promising. Senator Saxby Chambliss, who's a Republican from Georgia, is one of my favorite politicians. He's not in the Senate anymore, unfortunately. He retired, but he just knows so much about agriculture, and he knows the experiences of farmers, what challenges they face. That's something from which anyone who works in at least a role even vaguely like mine in the government can benefit from. It didn't matter what party he was. What mattered was he had a lot of information and stuff from which you can learn. And that seems to be a productive attitude. For anyone who gets to work in Washington, at least my own view, there are people who differ, but is to see yourself as part of a team. You're the New York Yankees and those other people are the Boston Red Sox, and that's pretty terrible. We root for the Yankees, and we try to help them. That's a disservice to the American people.
Let me break apart something that I felt like I was witnessing for the first time in this past election cycle, this past presidential election cycle. And that would be the rift that appeared in both parties. For example, you had Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. You had Donald Trump versus everyone else. This seemed to be exaggerated. It seemed to be pushed inside social media. I saw such strident takes and all those different quadrants. Why don't we, because I think your new work, Republic, does a great job of this, why don't we start to break this open for the real learning lesson about what's going on behind the scenes with the algorithms that, for example, a Facebook is using, a Twitter, others, where we are somewhat, as you say, by our own choices, but by also other people's choices, being slotted into these groups, these echo chambers. Speak to some of the technology that's going on behind the scenes that we're probably not paying attention to.
Probably some people have noticed that if you go on a site, Amazon is one a lot of people use, and if you look for, let's say, luggage on the site, then you're going to go maybe on Facebook and you're interacting with your friends, and all of a sudden these luggage ads are going to appear. Now, that's not an especially fancy algorithm, but it shows tracking behavior such that they can personalize advertisements to you. so too, if they know that you are a certain political type, and they can track that pretty well based on your behavior, they can figure out that you'll kind of want to see stuff that is consistent, let's say, with Senator Sanders' views, and it might be an advertisement for a campaign donation to someone who's like Senator Sanders. It might be a book that's reflects those same political views that someone who likes Senator Sanders is likely to find congenial. And that means that your Facebook page can actually be designed, and to some extent is designed, including your news feed, in a way that affects your own browsing habits. So your news feed will, of course, reflect your friends and what they think, but it's also tailored in a way that's highly personalized to your views. Now, I know Facebook is working on this. What will emerge might be more congenial to, let's say, civic respect, meaning you'll see lots of stuff and you won't be in a little cocoon of your own, not quite devising, but devised for you given your own preferences. In terms of Google's capacity to figure out what you like, there is an ability now to make it so that if you search for something, they can figure out by algorithm, not any individual, what search will fit your interests. So you might see something involving, let's say, Trump, that will reflect your skepticism or enthusiasm for Trump. Exactly to what extent this is being done in any particular month is not widely known. It is known by people inside companies. And as I said, I wouldn't say there's anything necessarily nefarious, or I wouldn't even say there's anything nefarious about it. What they're trying to do is find for you something that is suitable to your interests and values. And there's something, respectful about that. And it's good if you are interested in luggage that you see ads for luggage rather than seeing ads for cell phones if you have no interest in buying cell phones. So it's in your interest as well as in the interest of the seller. But if you're being sorted by algorithm into a little echo chamber or something that's kind of like an echo chamber, that's not good for you because your horizons are being limited. And it's also not good for our system because lots of people's horizons are being limited. Facebook did a study a while ago of its own algorithm, and it did show that its algorithm has a modest but real echo chamber effect. That is, they cut out stuff from liberals' feed that will be conservative. Not all the time, but there's a greater cutting out of the conservative stuff from the liberals' feed than of liberal stuff from the liberal feed, and it's completely symmetrical that conservatives will have some cutting out of liberal stuff and less cutting out of conservative stuff. There's a capacity to do much more of that, and according to some statements by some social media managers, doing this is kind of the wave of the future and a thing of great beauty. I hope it's clear from the tenor of the conversation that given our democratic aspirations, it's not freedom, that's self-sorting, it's a prison.
You're very clear in your work. You're not the direction that you see, for example, and we're just using Facebook as an example. Your subtitle includes the phrase social media, so we're using it's encompassing. But this idea of this grouping, it's you really don't feel this is not a help to democracy.
No, it's a very serious problem. And if anything, I think my own book is calmer than reality warrants. And that's because I think any author has a duty really to readers to take it down a notch. That's probably a way of disciplining oneself. But if I had really to do it over again, I might take it up at least a half notch. And the reason is if you have people who are mostly hearing stuff about how, let's take Senator Sanders and his fans as an example, not to disparage them, but just to take them as vivid. And they think the system is rigged and that the fact that Trump is in charge is a reflection of the rigged nature of the system, and that those who challenge, let's say, the Dodd-Frank legislation are in the pockets of the banks, and that really there's nothing to be done except to crack open reopen a broken system. And that's what they're hearing. Now, I don't believe that's true, by the way, those statements I just made as kind of reflective of Senator Sanders' view. But even if they are true, even if he's fundamentally right, if you see it that way and you don't understand the view of people who think Donald Trump may not be the perfect president, but at least he's going to correct some of the excesses and the inattention, as many of our fellow citizens see it, of the Democratic Party. If you don't understand that, and that there's at least truth in some of that, and if you can't understand the content of the objection to the Dodd-Frank bill, some of which is that banks that aren't doing so great, they're just trying to serve people in little communities, are being overrun a bit by regulatory requirements that aren't necessary to protect consumers or to stabilize the system. And as I say, I'm myself basically a fan of Dodd-Frank's. So all I mean to say is if you're a little kind of Senator Sanders cocoon, you're probably going to be making some big mistakes. You're going to be really angry with a lot of your fellow citizens, and you're not going to have an understanding of why they think what they do. And that's going to make productive conversation, let alone legislative improvements, really challenging. Now, suppose it's not just the Senator Sanders cocoon. There's a Senator Cruz cocoon and a Steve Bannon cocoon, and there's a Secretary Clinton cocoon, and these are, very different cocoons. That makes something like what we observed in the last few years of the Obama administration, and we're probably going to see it a lot in the Trump administration, inevitable, where productive compromises on big issues just can't get done through the legislature, certainly, and that means a ton falls to the executive branch to try to handle with its frequently limited tools big problems, sometimes in partisan ways, sometimes not, but the tools are limited. So if you want to do something about the fact that 40,000 Americans died in motor vehicle accidents in 2016, and that's a number. It's not a stream of dead bodies. It's a number. But the number captures something which is in 40,000 cases a genuine tragedy. What are we going to do about that? If Congress can't do stuff, then the executive branch has to try, and it can do a fair bit, but its tools just are limited compared to the tools that the national legislature with its appropriating and lawmaking capacity has.
Let me bring up a topic which I think pulls in some of that limitation from the executive branch that you're just mentioning right there, which is the second travel ban that the Trump administration has just put out. And I noticed that Alan Dershowitz came out and had a view on it. And it wasn't necessarily as much that, picking one side or the other. That wasn't the point. But what I took away from it was that Professor Dershowitz is saying this, giving this legal comment, this perspective. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I'm not an attorney. I get to learn something. I get a perspective from a guy who's a very bright guy. He's been around the block. We're losing that. I mean, I'll give another side example. A couple of weeks ago, Van Jones made a comment about Donald Trump, and the left just took him apart. I find that's the interesting thing right now, is that you can see the examples that you're describing unfolding in your book are playing out on a daily basis. And I think what's going to really ultimately happen is who wants to take that heat? I mean, if Van Jones decides he wants to say one thing positive about Trump because he made that observation and he takes that much heat, I would think that the natural human reaction is to kind of pull back and not try that again in the future.
I don't know about any particular person and what kind of vulnerability they have to criticism. It may be that some have an appetite for it, and they are emboldened by the criticism. It clearly is true that tribalism can be a serious deterrent to candor. I guess I'm less worried about a negative reaction on Twitter or elsewhere to what some commentator says on television than to concrete problems that actual people are facing and the extent to which our government is disabled from trying to handle them. So one example I'll give is the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a fantastically successful program. It's better than the minimum wage for helping the working poor. There's been a lot of discussion on the part of both Republicans and Democrats of how it actually incentivizes work. I think in the campaign, President Trump was favorably disposed toward increasing the Earned Income Tax Credit. That would be expanding it in terms of magnitude of the credit and of eligibility. It's going to make a real impact on a lot of people's lives. But sometimes the Earned Income Tax Credit debates get turned into something like our side, your side thing. When that happens, then you just can't do anything about it. And there are people, our fellow citizens, who are earning not a lot of money and working really, really hard, and they're deprived of a benefit which could ultimately, and the data shows this, increase the chances their kids will go to college. And we don't give that to them. And that seems, there's a lot of talk about Hamilton and his genius prompted by the Broadway musical. And Hamilton really was the hero of deliberation among people who were very different and how that can be a creative force. And we're living in a way Hamilton's nightmare, where the disagreement among people who are on different sides or in different tribes, it's not a creative force, it's a force of paralysis.
I'd be amiss if I did not go back in time a little bit with you. You've got the expertise, you've got the knowledge. The founding fathers, they looked at their early take on this was they wanted an exposure to the uncomfortable. Maybe I'm phrasing that a little bit wrong, but the idea that there would be the public square where there would be this debate, both sides would not necessarily by law would hear each other, but there would be that interaction. They were trying to figure out hooks and triggers in their work to keep us engaged with each other, even if we had disparate views. Take us back in time, because you really do have the experience here. Give us some idea of the founding fathers and their drafting, their thinking to keep us engaged with each other, to keep us exposed to the uncomfortable, ideas that, perhaps we would not normally advance ourselves, but we listen to someone else and we listen to their point of view. And again, this is your book. I must say, your cover is a little deceptive because it feels like, okay, maybe this is going to be an easy retail read. You get into the detail, and you know that.
Well, the book is really fun. I mean, I can't imagine if you want to have an hour. You could watch an old episode of Friends, or you could watch Homeland, or you could have dinner with someone you're in love with. But there's a fourth opportunity. Read that book. I think, okay, I take your point.
It might take more than an hour.
Okay, I take your point. But the founding is fun, and with respect to my experience, I only have book learning, but I have some of that with respect to the founding. And here's one way to think of it, that the big idea before the American founders got going was if you want a well-functioning system of self-government, it needs to have two features. It needs to be little, and the people need to be homogenous. So you need a small group of people together. Think of a little town where they can all talk to each other and they're basically the same. And the great theory was that's the only circumstance where a system of self-government work. Otherwise, it's going to crash and burn. And there's actually a name associated with the theory that it needs to be little and it needs to be homogeneous, and that's Montesquieu. And Montesquieu, great theorist of separation of powers and various forms of government, was a big influence on the founding generation, and he was, a giant in terms of how to think about government. But our founders, Hamilton and Madison, most prominent among them, thought that Montesquieu had it exactly wrong. It wasn't like he was, 90% right. It's that he was precisely wrong. He had it backwards. So Hamilton and Madison urged that if you really want a system of self-government to work, you need two things. It needs to be big and it needs to be diverse. Not little and homogeneous, big and diverse. And the reason was if it's big, then you get people who are terrific, who are going to end up in positions of authority. They're terrific both in terms of quality of mind and also quality of character. They're the people who end up there. And if it's diverse, then you will have more reflection and deliberation, because people with different perspectives are all going to be talking with each other. And out of that, good solutions are going to emerge. If people just think the same way, it's going to be an echo chamber, and they're not going to learn anything. Now, I think Madison and Hamilton not only contributed, massively to theory, but they, even more important, they contributed massively to practice. They created a system of government, which I think best in the history of the human species. That's ours, our system of government. But now we are, as noted, experiencing Hamilton's nightmare, in the sense that a big, diverse place is disabled by virtue of enmity and an absence of mutual understanding. Not disabled all the time, certainly. Our system is functioning, but disabled compared to what it should be doing, which is doing something about infrastructure, doing something about immigration, or doing something about the problem of 40,000 deaths on the highway or persistent poverty. At least doing a lot more than we've done. For the next generation, turning Hamilton's nightmare into something more dreamlike, probably task number one.
Well, it's becoming I wonder what the founding fathers would say if you were explaining to them today that we are either at or moving towards the daily me.
Yeah, that would be alarming to them. So the idea of the daily me is the fact that either through algorithm or through individual choice, you can create a communications experience particularly tailored for you. And a lot of people are doing that to a greater or lesser degree, so that if you're interested in, let's say, Russia, or if you're interested in poverty and its reduction, you can just focus on that all the time. If you just want to hear about the wonderfulness of the Democratic Party, you can focus on that. And the fact that you don't have, if you're engineering a daily me, you don't have unplanned, unchosen encounters with topics and perspectives, that can be good for you because you don't want that. But it can also be limiting for you because you don't benefit from that. And it can be destructive all over the place. And this is, I think, what would worry the founders, not in the sense that each individual life is necessarily impoverished, though I think it is, but our ability to interact with one another in a politically productive way is diminished, but also in a culturally productive way. Consistently inspiring things about our country is that if you spend a day in a few different places, or even in one place, just the sheer range of interests and backgrounds and professions and wit that you're going to find, knock your socks off. And a lot of that stuff you wouldn't put in your daily me. You may end up having a buddy, or at least an acquaintance, who is, you've never seen anyone like that. And maybe your initial reaction is, oh my God, I'm so glad I've never seen anybody like that. But after 15 minutes, you think, you know what? The person's all right. Or maybe I know something now about humanity or about my city. And I'm kind of glad I do. And the daily me isn't going to get you there.
What you're really getting at, too, is that this daily me concept takes away surprise. I'll give you an example of myself. A couple years ago, I was hired to give a speaking tour over several months in Asia. And at the end of that 3 or 4 months, I decided I did not want to go back to San Diego. So I spend most of my time in Saigon, Vietnam. If I would have had that cocoon of the daily me, I would have been like, well, I can't do that. You would not even get exposed to the surprise.
Oh, completely. And I'm sure, the overwhelming majority of humanity can think of at least one tale that's a little like what you just told, where something that they didn't choose, but they happened to do, maybe they didn't want to so much, ended up exposing them to something that reoriented their personal life, their professional life, their political life, something really big. Of course, we're never going to lose that, but to the extent that you are using your online behavior to circle the wagons, you're not going to get what you kind of need for your individual life. And we're trying to figure out how to interact with people who see the world very differently from us. If we never see them, then we're probably going to think of them as enemies or traitors or something.
You're no Luddite on this. You are not saying tech is the enemy.
Oh, I think the internet on balance is a huge boon for people, and very hard to deny that, and then social media too. So I'm a big fan of Facebook and Twitter. They're on balance great, but one way to think of it is that automobiles are a huge benefit for mankind, but just to rest content with, isn't it amazing we can get from one place to another in a hurry? But also thinking, what are some downsides, like air pollution, say, or dependence on foreign oil, and what are we going to do about that? That's probably a fuller perspective than just the celebration.
You know, if I had you for 10 hours today, I could ask you 10 hours of questions. So I'm going to jump around a little on you. There's an issue here that there's something that you bring up, a couple different topics that I really think are interesting. Would love you to touch on before I lose you today. Freedom equaling choice. So many of us think that all of this choice that we have equals freedom. You make some interesting points, which I share, which is that sometimes all of that choice is not necessarily freedom.
To think of freedom of choice and freedom as identical is a lot of the picture, but it isn't the whole thing. And here are a couple ways to think of it. One is, if you are showing up at your workplace and your employer says, we have a choice for you among health plans, and there are 80 options. You might not think that your day just got better. You might think
it's like mutual funds too. Same thing with mutual funds. Like here's a million mutual funds to choose from. Who wants to sift through that?
Yeah, completely. So you might say 80, really? Can you maybe give me a small set of the leading ones or representative ones? And you might think, I'm freer, actually, if I have some time I can devote to my day rather than just time devoting to the 80 plans. So if you're given a zillion choices, that can occupy time. And being able to manage your time is part of freedom. I think a more fundamental point is that we express freedom in different ways. One is by making consumption choices, like I want that cereal and not that sugary one. And also we express our freedom by thinking, I want my country to be a certain way. And you might want your country to be a certain way, even if that way doesn't exactly track your choices at the grocery store. So you might think, I want us to do something about the problem of obesity, even though my belly's sticking out and I really love those brownies. And if you express your freedom by urging or supporting, let's say, reasonable steps to combat obesity, that's promoting your freedom. The framers were actually really interesting on this. They believed in commerce, and they weren't indifferent to the idea that in a free society you get to take the job that you like and purchase what you want. But when they thought about freedom, they thought also about our capacity to govern ourselves. And in the kind of Silicon Valley,
consumer versus citizen.
Completely. So in the Silicon Valley, which has done so many fantastic things for the country and the world, there is a little bit of consumer freedom gone crazy as the dominant model of what human freedom at its highest is. And we have some aspirations for ourselves and our nation and our fellow citizens. And if we want to try to embody those aspirations in what our government does, you could take it as protecting endangered species, or you could take it as doing something to incentivize parents to take better care of their kids, that's freedom too.
Let me shift you into, again, you've got so many cool topic areas I just want to pick your mind on. Let's go international for a moment, because America is not the only place dealing with social media. There are many countries, and if I look to Asia for a moment, we have one of the biggest internet bases around in China. Clearly, there's censorship there. I can also look to other countries in Asia that people might not think have censorship, but I've experienced it. I've seen the blacked out websites. That would be Singapore, Thailand, and actually I've seen no censorship on the internet in Vietnam. There's a certain fragility in the non-democracies. I know this is a topic we could talk for hours about this, but wet people's whistle a little bit. Give them some understanding about your view on the social media explosion in countries where they don't have democracy.
I want to be very cautious here, because anyone from a particular country, and the United States is my own, might be insensitive to the possibility that particular practices that you deem kind of fantastic and perfect aren't well suited to other countries. So I want to be a little humble about that, at the same time as insisting that at least some forms of freedom from censorship, and I'm putting the word "some forms" in bold letters, are a universal human good. If you have a country that is blocking access to, let's say, criticisms of the government's own performance, that is not good, not only because it makes it very difficult to have any form of airing of concerns, which the government and other people should hear about, but also because it makes it harder to address those concerns because people don't hear about them. So let's make up a country, call it MIT. I think it's a country, not a university. And suppose MIT is a young country that's trying to stabilize itself and is very concerned about popular uprisings and censors debate, which includes harsh criticism of the current government. That's a problem, in the sense that if people in our imaginary country are suffering, the likelihood that the suffering will be addressed is just decreased if you can't have conversation about it. So there's that point. Now, the category of censorship is also making me a little cautious here. It's very broad. So in democratic nations, you can't bribe people on the internet or otherwise. You can't commit fraud, even through words alone. You can't conspire to fix prices or conspire to kill somebody. You can't have at least child pornography. Sexually explicit speech is available, but child pornography is illegal. So there's a lot of stuff that is censored, and that's compatible with, in my view, that's compatible with democratic norms. There's a pretty long-winded way of saying that whatever your country, whether democratic or not, there's really good reason to allow grievances to be expressed, not least because a government, even in a non-democratic country, kind of needs to hear that stuff so that it can figure out what to do. And if you censor that, then the kinds of human suffering that, let's say, non-democratic countries that are aspiring to do well by their people, those kinds of human suffering will be less likely to be alleviated.
I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, so I unfortunately had way too much politics. You at least got to grow up in Massachusetts, away from it for a while. But let's go into the topic of media for a moment, and let me pick your mind on some perspectives here in the context of your newest work. I'm having a hard time myself looking at any major media, and I'm talking newspapers or cable TV shows or the nightly news. I'm having a hard time looking at any of them today and not saying to myself, okay, they're partisan and they're to this side. Okay, they're partisan and to that side. I feel like everything today has become in terms of major media is opposition on either side and very partisan. Am I completely off base in that judgment from your perspective?
Try on questions like that, and it's a great question, to be empirical rather than impressionistic. What I want to do is collect, this is a really boring answer, is collect either a random sample or even better, an exhaustive non-random set of media, and then see to what extent the generalization holds. So I'm agnostic on that question. Surely it is the case that many of the most prominent outlets are readily identifiable in political terms, but some of them, to their credit, while they are identifiable in political terms, either their purely news reporting is above the partisan fray, or their overall perspective is clear, but it isn't unbroken. And that's really good. So if you take the New York Times, they are identified, and I'm sure this is fair, as a left-of-center paper, but they do have writers for them who are not left-of-center, and that's responsible. And the Wall Street Journal, which is a right-of-center place, it has reporting, which impressionistically I find is often just reporting. You can't tell what side it's from. And they have articles which are not identifiably right-of-center.
You know, you say it, and I think this is, people are going to have to dig in and read, but you remind at several points in your book, Franklin's words back to one of the founding fathers, what have you guys done behind closed doors there? And his line is, we created a republic if you can keep it. Are you convinced we can keep it?
Oh, sure. We've done well for a long, long time, and there's a great behavioral scientist named Amos Tversky who said, I'm an optimist, because if you're a pessimistic, you suffer twice. Once when you anticipate the bad thing, and then again when the bad thing happens. So I think that's a good reason to be an optimist, but the arc of American history is not just highly, but kind of crazy supportive of optimism.
Well, you just mentioned somebody who I would have loved to have had a conversation with. Unfortunately, he's not with us still, but that would have been a great conversation to have with him. I had a chance to speak with Daniel Kahneman on this show, so that was great too. The book, and are you calling it #Republic? Is that how when you refer to it to someone?
Hashtag Republic.
Yeah, #Republic, Divided Democracy in the Age of Social Media. Professor, I appreciate you taking some time today.
Great. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.